Something just happened that wasn't supposed to happen. According to emerging reports, Iran's Arash-2 drones may have slipped past one of the most advanced air defense systems in the world and targeted a major Israeli airport. If that sounds unbelievable, it's because it is. Systems like the Iron Dome are designed for this exact scenario, detecting, tracking, and neutralizing incoming threats before they ever reach critical infrastructure. So how does something like this even happen? Was this a rare gap, a one-off failure, or are we looking at the early signs of a much bigger shift in modern warfare? Because if low-cost drones can bypass billion-dollar defenses, then the balance of power may already be changing in ways most people aren't prepared for. And what you're about to see isn't just about one strike or one country or even one moment. It points to something deeper, something unfolding quietly in the background, while the world still assumes everything is under control. But the real story is much bigger than that, and it starts right here, earlier than most people realize. In the hours following the incident, the details began to emerge, but not in a clear or consistent way. Iranian sources were quick to claim that their Arash-2 drones had successfully penetrated Israeli air defenses and struck a major airport, targeting key infrastructure tied to military logistics. According to their narrative, this was not a random hit, but a calculated operation aimed at disrupting aircraft operations, fuel storage, and overall readiness. It was presented as proof that their technology could reach deep and hit precisely where it matters most. On the other side, Israeli officials acknowledged that damage had occurred within the airport perimeter, but strongly pushed back on the idea of a direct strike. Their explanation pointed toward interception debris, fragments from incoming threats that were successfully neutralized mid-air, falling onto the airfield and causing secondary damage. In their version, the defense system worked as intended, and what happened on the ground was an unfortunate byproduct of that success, not a failure. Now here's where it gets complicated. Independent reports confirmed that multiple aircraft were damaged, with some described as severely burned. But none of these reports could definitively verify whether the damage came from direct impact or falling debris. So you're left with two completely different interpretations of the same event, both backed by official statements, both technically plausible, and that leaves a critical question hanging in the air. If the system worked, why was there damage at all? But this is where things don't add up. To understand why this incident is causing so much concern, you have to look closely at the weapon at the center of it. The Arash-2 is not just another drone in the growing list of unmanned systems. It represents a very specific evolution, one that blends the affordability of drones with the strategic impact of much more advanced weapons. And that combination is what makes it so difficult to ignore. On paper, the specifications already raise eyebrows. The Arash-2 is reported to have a range of around 2,000 kilometers, enough to travel from deep inside Iranian territory to major targets across Israel without needing forward deployment. It carries a payload estimated at roughly 150 kilograms, significantly heavier than earlier platforms like the Shahed 136, which gained global attention in previous conflicts. That increase in payload alone changes the type of targets it can effectively damage, shifting from harassment to meaningful infrastructure disruption. Speed and flight profile matter just as much. Unlike traditional missiles that follow predictable trajectories, the Arash-2 flies low and relatively slow, cruising at speeds around 180 kilometers per hour. That might sound unimpressive, but it is exactly what makes it harder to detect. Flying beneath radar coverage and presenting a small radar signature, it forces defense systems to work harder, react faster, and often at a higher cost. This is why many defense analysts have started referring to it as a low-cost cruise missile. Not because it matches the sophistication of advanced cruise systems, but because it achieves a similar strategic effect at a fraction of the price. Instead of spending millions on a single precision strike, it allows for repeated, scalable attacks that can overwhelm defenses over time. And when you step back and connect these details, a pattern begins to emerge. This is not about one drone getting through, it is about a system designed to exploit gaps, stretch defenses, and apply pressure continuously. And this creates a much bigger problem that extends far beyond a single incident. For years, the Iron Dome has been seen as one of the most reliable air defense systems ever built. Its core idea is simple but powerful. But that reputation was built around a very specific kind of threat. Mostly unguided rockets, fired from relatively close distances, following predictable paths. What happens when the threat changes? When instead of fast, high-arc projectiles, you are dealing with slower, low-flying drones that can adjust their path and approach from unexpected angles. Suddenly, the system is no longer operating in the environment it was optimized for. There have already been signs of this strain. Reports of interception debris causing damage on the ground raise uncomfortable questions. Even when the system works, the result isn't always clean. Fragments fall, sometimes inside the very areas being protected. In other cases, analysts and former defense officials have openly acknowledged that no system offers complete coverage, especially against smaller unmanned aerial vehicles. Some get through, not because the system is broken, but because it was never designed to handle this scale and type of threat simultaneously. And this is where perception begins to shift. The idea of an impenetrable shield starts to give way to something more fragile, more conditional. It still works, but not always in the way people expect, and not without consequences. A system like Iron Dome relies on interceptors that can cost tens of thousands of dollars per launch. More advanced systems designed to handle larger or more complex threats can cost hundreds of thousands, even millions for a single engagement. Now compare that to the estimated cost of drones like the Arash-2, which are believed to be produced for a fraction of that amount. Even if the exact numbers vary, the imbalance is clear. The attacker is spending significantly less per attempt than the defender is spending per response. At first, this might not seem like a critical issue. After all, if the majority of incoming threats are intercepted, the system is doing its job. But over time, volume changes everything. If dozens or even hundreds of drones are launched, the defender is forced to respond to each credible threat. That means more interceptors, more resources, and more pressure on supply chains that are not built for endless demand. This is where the idea of saturation comes into play. Defense systems have limits, not just in detection, but in how many threats they can engage at once. Even a high success rate begins to look different under constant pressure. What makes this situation even more concerning is that it doesn't exist in isolation. Events like this rarely stay contained within borders, especially in a region as interconnected and volatile as the Middle East. When one side introduces a new capability or exposes a weakness, it doesn't just affect the immediate battlefield. It forces every neighboring country, every allied force, and every global power watching from a distance to reassess their own position. There are already signs of that shift. Increased alert levels, repositioning of defense systems, and growing coordination between allies all point to a wider sense of unease. Because the question is no longer just about one country's defenses. It becomes about how many others might face a similar challenge if this type of technology continues to spread or evolve. And history shows how quickly things can escalate once that uncertainty takes hold. One incident leads to a response. That response triggers another, and before long, multiple players are drawn into a situation that none of them fully control anymore. It's a chain reaction, and once it begins, slowing it down becomes incredibly difficult. This is where the real tension lies, not just in what has already happened, but in what could happen next. Because if this is the beginning of a pattern rather than a one-off event, then the scope of the conflict may already be expanding beyond what most people realize, turning a localized confrontation into something far more unpredictable and far more dangerous over time. So where does this go from here? That's the question no one can answer with certainty, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes this moment so important. On one side, defenses will adapt. They always do. New systems will be tested, detection methods refined, and strategies adjusted to counter what we're seeing now. But adaptation takes time, and in that gap between threat and response, the balance can shift in ways that are hard to reverse. At the same time, there's the possibility that attacks don't just continue, they evolve. If one method proves effective, it rarely stays unchanged. It gets refined, scaled, and repeated. What works once becomes a template, and if that happens, then this isn't just an isolated incident anymore, it becomes the early stage of a new pattern. That raises a deeper question. Are we witnessing a temporary disruption or the beginning of a different kind of warfare altogether? One where lower-cost systems consistently challenge high-end defenses, forcing a rethink of everything from strategy to spending. And the truth is, we may not fully understand the answer yet, but the direction things are moving in is becoming harder to ignore with each passing day. Now I want to hear your perspective, because this is one of those moments where public opinion is just as divided as the facts on the ground. Do you think this situation is heading toward escalation, or will things stabilize before it goes any further? Is this a temporary shock or the start of something much bigger that changes how conflicts are fought? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your take might highlight something others are missing, and that's what makes these discussions valuable.